I think we should probably shift the discussion more to the evolution of Windows
Yes.
because let's face facts, John. You and I have both been gaming on a Windows handheld, and Oliver, in fact, with your ROG Ally. And the Windows experience has been, I'd say, dire. They're making
bad.
big attempts, big efforts here to actually revamp this. And this is the first time we actually got to see some of those features. So something you've been talking about for a long time, John, which is a games first interface that can drop back to the Windows desktop in the same way that SteamOS can drop back to the Linux desktop. That's something you've been talking about for years.
Yes.
We've got it now. It boots into the Windows front end that is gaming specific, a full screen experience, as they say. I'm kind of curious as to why full screen is the differentiating factor, but there it is. They've also been talking about efficiencies made to sleep mode, so it can persist for 3 times longer. And I think you mentioned that they've cleared up, I'm not going to call it bloat, but stuff that isn't required for a game's experience to free up a notional up to 2 gigabytes of extra space. The unified launcher, which basically means that if you've got your Steam games, you've got your Epic games, all of those games will become accessible via I guess it's the Xbox app, whatever this is that we're seeing here. That's all good news. And I guess this is their sort of route forward for how things are probably going to work on the next generation Xbox.
Agreed.
Yeah. What do you think about that, John?
So obviously we need to see more, but I do admittedly really like this direction here. Basically, they're essentially killing Explorer.exe, if you will, when you're running the normal like gaming focused version, replacing it, if you will, with a completely different interface, which is exactly what Valve is doing with Linux, right?
Yep.
And presumably you can still get back to the desktop then. Yeah, you're saying that? Okay,
I believe you can, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. So this really is, you get the full functionality of a PC, but by default, it actually boots up in this proper game-oriented user interface, which that could be the game changer. Like, obviously we need to test this for ourselves and see how it all plays out. But I think the reason they call it full screen, and they've stressed that, is just because the idea is that everything you need for a good gaming experience, to adjust settings, to do anything at all within the hardware, can be done from that interface using the actual interface presented to the player, i.e. D-pad, analog stick buttons, because fundamentally that's why the Windows experience has not worked well on those handhelds, because there's so many times where you're faced with something popping up and it's like, oh, I need to switch to the virtual mouse cursor, and now up here comes the keyboard. Okay, yes. What's the shortcut to bring up the keyboard thing again? Oh yeah, it's this. Oh, it doesn't work that well. It's just constant, that sort of stuff. So getting away from that, making sure everything is completely functional with the buttons included and correctly mapped and everything, that could be a really big deal. And also, I assume that it'll handle driver stuff, hopefully similar to the way Valve does, where it's all kind of rolled into like updates to the system OS side of things. You know what I mean? Because like on the Steam Deck, you don't have to worry about drivers like a PC, right? It's all just embedded in the Steam update stuff. And Microsoft is going to need to do the same thing here, I think, for this to be effective. They can't have users updating individual components. It just needs to be, here's a system update, and they like fix things or like add features. That's what it needs to be. But then the other thing we still don't know, and this is what I'm very curious about, is how they're going to handle things like shader cache and other functions that SteamOS is so good at, to ensure that everyone has a really good experience. Because even if you have this great interface, if you load it up and you're faced with the typical stuttering that we often see, things that SteamOS has actually been really good at eliminating, because they have a fixed hardware platform and can sort of pre-cache all of this stuff. I hope they have a solution for that as well.
And we're talking about a pretty fundamental revamp to DirectX to make all of that sort of stuff.
I know, but like, if they need to do something if they want this to work, right? Like, if they can't just leave it as is, otherwise then it will continue to fall short of what Valve is offering. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but if this is the direction they're going, they've got to figure out something, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my concern is maybe they've made this interface, but I do think it is going to be work in progress.
Yeah.
Even when the device ships. I mean, maybe those emulators, the OG and 360 emulators, will be part of it. We don't know. That was the other thing. I mean, I did have a pre-brief of this last Friday, and there was no questions. You weren't allowed to ask questions. Had to divert questions to your Xbox rep, and obviously that was on Friday, so the chances of actually getting an answer back before they revealed the thing on Sunday is quite slight. Also, there was a good degree of YouTube videos on the likes of Linus, the Forks, Dave 2D, etc. But they were missing crucial information, which I'm sure, Carey would have been asking a bunch of questions, but apparently there weren't any replies forthcoming based on the content that we saw. So, there's it's just a lot of question marks that need to be resolved here. I mean, you're quite right. The driver update situation is certainly something that needs to be handled a lot more gracefully. It's a bit of a pit on the current handhelds. The other things they're doing, which I found quite interesting, is although it is primarily an Xbox piece of software, they're integrating the Armory Crate from Asus into the game bar, which I found quite interesting. Yeah, I think they need a unified interface that works on everything. I'm not sure, sort of picking and choosing vendor-specific components to put into game bar. Maybe for a first effort like this, ideally you'd be looking for a more unified solution, which is exactly what the likes of Bazzite are doing on Windows, I believe.
Yeah.
Oliver, curious about your thoughts on this whole front end.
Yeah, I think that what Microsoft is trying to do here is they're trying to solve the interface problem, or part of the interface problem, let's say the biggest part of the interface problem, by booting into this quote-unquote full-screen Xbox experience that replaces the Windows desktop essentially as your first port of call for use with one of these devices. And they're also, they're talking about some improvements to system performance. They're talking about a big reduction in standby power. And like you said, Rich, a 2 gigabyte savings. They claim up to 2 gigabytes from not loading a bunch of components, not loading the Windows desktop, not doing a bunch of the stuff that you'd expect in a PC. Normally, they're not going to load those components. Providing all this works correctly, I think this helps a fair bit, I would say. I really wish this had existed in the market like 2 years ago when PC handhelds started to become fairly popular, when we had the ROG Ally being shipped in mass quantities. I think that would have been nice to see. But we do kind of have something similar to this on PC right now in some form, which is just booting your device into the Steam Big Picture mode. And a lot of this functionality is present there with a fantastic interface that is like tried and tested and true and really good, that Microsoft, I think, is going to struggle to beat. So that's one note here as well. Like there are a lot of things in this that right now in Windows with Big Picture mode, you can kind of get today. If we're talking about having a good launcher to explore and navigate a console-like interface, that's certainly there. But there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily being solved by this effort, or at least I have not seen any publicity that they're solving. Like it's not shit. I don't think they're fixing shit or compilation stutter from the bat with something like Fossilize. I don't suspect they're going to fix all the driver issues that people have. I don't think they're going to help you very much fixing sleep or zoom issues in games. They did talk apparently to, I think, Dave 2D about maybe fixing those issues, but I don't know if those will be part of this initial effort here. They're also not going to fix, I really doubt anyways that I have a way to fix this, but fixing mouse-centric launchers and interfaces in games. That is a critical issue that we see also in SteamOS, right? We see that in the Steam Deck, but the Steam Deck, it has 2 big trackpads. It has, big trackpads that make it very easy to navigate mouse-centric interfaces. And in this case, are you going to fall back on the thumbsticks? That's kind of miserable. Are you going to fall back on the touchscreen? That's also kind of miserable. It's not a very good experience. Those are not precision devices that are useful for navigating a tiny, tiny Windows interface. That's a huge pain. It's also not clear if they'll be pre-configuring games with optimized settings like we see on Steam Deck. That's quite a nice feature that Valve does. They do indicate they're going to have a program similar to Steam Deck Verified, but it's not clear exactly what that's going to entail, if it's just going to be like a badge, like, yes, this runs on your Xbox or Ally or whatever you want to say. I'm not sure what that will entail. So I'm very interested in this. I think SteamOS or Bazzite is very hard to beat, and those are increasingly shipping on competitive handhelds that are competitive with this device beyond just the Steam Deck. Outside of game compatibility, which is better on Windows, and access to Game Pass, which is obviously a really nice bonus to get on Windows, I think those devices are going to be hard to beat in a lot of respects with this first generation kind of Windows Xbox effort. But I'm glad that Microsoft is trying to solve this UX problem, this massive UX problem. I hope they succeed. I hope they succeed in other areas, and I hope they spend some time, I hope they are spending time right now trying to tackle every single one of the key issues that we complain about, that Alex and I complain about in various videos, and John complains about, and Rich complains about, that make Windows a very imperfect choice for a gaming handheld.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few final things that I've got on my mind here. Steam Deck, I think it came out, February?
Early 2022? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, winter 2025, with a device that has practically the same SoC. That's really bad. That's not great. So I can only assume, and this brings me on to my second point, I can only assume that they're going to be putting that device out at a very keen price point. And even then, I think there's going to be a huge comparison point there, which is, stuff like Lenovo Legion Go, the original Ally, which will be probably priced very, very similar. They've already had some pretty steep discounts across their life cycle. And those devices, in theory, especially if you can run this new version of Windows on it, will be better than this. Certainly in terms of game performance. Secondly, let's talk about price. I mean, the Ally, the non-X version, could be quite competitively priced, I think. The Ally X, though, that's using top-end silicon from AMD, 24 gigs of memory, 1 terabyte SSD. It says to me that that's going to be quite expensive unless Microsoft can maybe use some of its purchasing power to get a sweetheart deal with AMD on that top-end silicon, which I don't know. Who's actually in charge of the supply lines there? Is it ASUS or Xbox? We don't really know. How expensive is that going to be? Because if it's like an $800 handheld, that is an Xbox, that's not going to go down particularly well. What do you think, Oliver?
No, I don't think it's going to go down particularly well. And when we start talking about the kinds of points of comparison that are going to come up here, I think the Steam Deck in its various incarnations starts at like $400 US with that like 64 gigabyte eMMC model with the LCD, and then it terminates at like $550 somewhere in that range with the OLED models, with the various OLED models. So that's an obvious point of comparison. I think the Switch 2 is another key point of comparison now. That comes in at $450 US. That, in a lot of respects, like I was just playing Hogwarts Legacy the other day, the Hogwarts Legacy version you're getting on Windows is not nearly as performant, I'll spoil this, as the Hogwarts Legacy that you can get right now on Switch 2. Like it is a different version of Hogwarts Legacy, sure. Does it have some asset compromises? Sure. But it runs a heck of a lot better in areas like Hogsmeade, than the Windows version does on any kind of reasonable Windows handheld. So there are a lot of devices I'd think of, also old Asus ROG Allies that have the Z1 Extreme chip. That is a chip that's very similar to the Z2 Extreme chip in terms of performance, from at least the metrics that we do have. There's a lot of competition from a lot of corners, from consoles to SteamOS to other Windows devices. And this is a very busy segment of the market, and I do wonder exactly where that price will come in, particularly for the lower end model for that regular Xbox Ally, if that will actually be a competitive price, and if that will actually reflect a product that can actually go toe to toe with some of these other offerings.
Yeah, that Z2A even being called a Z2 actually winds me up. It's just outrageous. Final thoughts on this from you, John?
Well, I mean, this is one of those, we have to wait and see where it goes. This particular product isn't that exciting to me, but it is exciting, at least moderately so, to see them tip their hand as to what they envision for Xbox going forward. I think we'll see a lot more from them. But yeah, this specific device, it comes off as being kind of anemic. It's a little bit too little, too late. It's unlikely to solve a lot of the main issues we have with Windows handheld gaming right now. And a lot of it's just going to come down to, I mean, if they can really get this out here at a very competitive price, and market it well, they could find some success, I'd imagine. But I don't know. I just don't see this moving the needle much for them on its own. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.